Hello, Shabbat Shalom. You are watching us recorded, but thank you for tuning in. And I am Stephanie Pavlantos, one of your hosts.
And I'm Lauren Cruz, one of your other hosts for Living Waters, falling deeper in love with God's Word. So thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I forgot to say that, didn't I? Hopefully it's obvious. But yeah, so we are still in Lost in Translation. If you are following along with us and reading this, we are in chapter 4, so we're not too far into it, but this is a long chapter, so we're probably going to split it in half because it deals with probably a lot of stuff that maybe we haven't heard before, right?
Very much so. Yeah, I had shared with Stephanie when we were speaking, this is one of those chapters that I personally have not done a lot of studying on angels and demons and all of that. I tend to just kind of take the Bible at its word, and I don't get into a lot of other mysticism and things like that. And knowing my background, very staunch Christian from the church background.
Baptist.
So I had I read through it slow, and I actually, and poor Stephanie was very patient with me before we jumped on. I mean, if he gave us a reference to a verse to make a certain point, I very much looked it up, and I wanted, because I didn't want to just take his word for it. I want to see, how is the word of God handling things?
Right.
How is the original language? Because if I've learned anything in Bible study, is translations are sometimes a little subjective. And so, I just took the time. So I went slow. We've decided we're probably going to split this chapter into 2 parts because I'm very slow. So hopefully we'll get some benefit out of it, though.
I read a really cool, I was looking up something totally different the other day for another class I'm teaching, and it was on El Shaddai, but I'm not going to get into all that. But one of the things he said is that if a word translated from the Hebrew seemed like it could be offensive, or it seemed like, whatever, like for some reason it didn't match the translator's theology, they would kind of change what it meant.
I believe it. Yeah.
And he really kind of made a point of saying our translations are based upon the translator's theology, worldview, mindset, belief system, all of that stuff. So that's just, we have to keep that in mind when we read the Bible.
Definitely.
Yeah. We're actually being influenced by somebody else's theology and somebody else's worldview.
Right.
So it's important to keep our own worldview and research.
And our own hermeneutics and our own apologetics,
all of those.
One of the things I've learned, I guess really since beginning, a Hebrew adventure is I have very much removed boundaries of denominations.
Yes.
Because certain people believe certain things based on denomination and tradition, but if it doesn't have anything to do with salvation, if it doesn't have anything to do with, sanctification or redemption, that kind of thing, I'm not going to fight with you about it because, you're going to feel very staunch about a belief just as much as I am.
Yeah.
And so, angels and demons, some denominations dive deep, right? And they have much more experience in dealing with the thought process of this than I do. So I'm not gonna take a hard stand on this. I am open-minded. I want to investigate these things, right? But when it comes for me, I'll just bring it back to the Word of God and find out what the Holy Spirit wants me to deal with it.
Right. And when I say worldview, to keep our worldview, I mean,
a Christian
worldview may be incorrect. So we also have to be open to the Lord changing it, but not other people changing it unless I think I can speak for Lauren. I mean, as teachers, we really want to make sure that we're on the right track.
Very much so.
I want to make sure that when I'm teaching, Lord, is this what you want me to say? Lord, is this what you want me to teach? Am I on the
Very
right
much so.
here? Am I correct here in
Yes.
understanding this verse or this passage or this
Yes.
book, you know? So so it's important that we always question things, but
Very much so. But I got one funny thing to say before. So after reading this, so now I'm like really mulling through the process and how I pray. And, I think I need to be a little more serious about dealing with the evil. And so then I'm just reading the book of Luke this month. I know a lot of people will read 1 through 24 until Christmas time or whatever. And I'm just going to read it and kind of see. Well, so now I'm like, oh, there's lots of demons in this chapter. The devil is very active in this book, and I think it's funny. It makes yourself aware of things and how you how you handle stuff.
Yeah, and even Gabriel, I think it's in some translations he goes, "I am one of those who stand before the Lord," and in another extra biblical book, it talks about Raphael saying he is one of 7 who stand in the presence of God. So, and then we see in Revelation these 7 angels.
Right.
So it kind of all comes together when you start really putting together that there are 7 angels who stand before the throne of the Lord, and they do his bidding. When he sends them to go talk to somebody, they go talk to somebody. When he sends them to throw coals down on the earth or to protect people, they go do it. And but there seems to be 7 of them, and that's why
I totally would agree with 7. I mean, if it were 4, I would go probably not, but I mean 7 is a good number for the Bible. So.
Like you have 7 seals, 7 trumpets.
Exactly.
7 trumpets are held by 7 angels. So and then the 7 bowls. So you have not that there aren't more angels. It's just that these 7 do what God tells them to do. They have a specific job. All right.
So I guess we should introduce. I guess we should make an official introduction. What are we talking about this week?
Yes. So chapter 4.
Chapter 4.
Devils and Demons is the title of this chapter, or this chapter. And just to highlight a few things, because we'll go into more depth, but we're going to talk about the different angels.
Yeah, he says that he calls it devils and demons, but half the chapter is angels.
Yeah, yeah, it is. So we're going to talk about the types of angels, and now he only says there's 3 types, which I know most of us have been taught differently. So
right.
Just listen.
Yeah,
let's hear it out.
I'll tell you my thinking. Yeah,
and then he gets into how they fell. And who the demons are, who the devils are. And we may not get to who the demons are today because of the length of the chapter. But he also goes back. So some of you who might be Catholic, this is going to kind of, your ears are going to start like, what? And because he talks a bit about the Catholic Church and the decisions that were made. So starting, that's where we kind of start.
You know what? Right? I'm going to make a disclaimer here, because there was no other church at the very beginning.
Right.
That was it. So we're not going to just say that was the Catholic Church. That was the church.
Yeah.
That was the church.
Yeah. So, it was way back then. Yeah.
Yeah.
Back in the time of what we're talking to, 553 AD. But I mean, I think there were some, like the Way.
Yeah.
Was the organ, like the Nazarenes were the first, what we might call Protestant or Messiah coming out of Jerusalem, right?
Yes.
So you had them, but then the Catholic Church was most of Europe. So the Roman Catholic.
Exactly.
So he starts out with Satan. So we get right to the big guns here. So he says Satan. So much of the history of the conflict between evil, between the evil spirit being we call Satan and God, against whom he rebelled, is recorded in Scripture.
Right.
So he I don't know, where do we want to go with this? So he kind of starts out there, but then he jumps to the Catholic Church, like
He
the
does.
different belief
He does.
system.
And I think what he's doing is he's using the Book of Enoch as his primary source. When I actually looked up his different footnotes, he had a lot of ibids. And so he was using one source to kind of go through some of that information. But so, and he uses the Book of Enoch for a lot of information. So I think,
because
in
it does
fairness,
have,
yeah, it's good to look at it. We should probably look at it. It's very, so I think of the Book of Enoch very much like Josephus. You know, Josephus is giving a historical book. It's not canonized. It, you know, it was written for a certain thing, but it's very informative. It's very much of the times, historical information.
Right. And they do believe that Enoch actually wrote it.
There you go. In the Book of the Maccabees, I mean, we as Protestants do not have the Maccabees in our book, but if you read through it, it's a great source of history.
Yeah.
And it has value. So it's not, I know it's not a canonized book, but
it was up for to become one.
Right.
So there was a lot of discussion about that book and a lot of arguments on every side as to why it should or shouldn't. Yes. These authors believe it should have been canonized.
Exactly. They really do. They make a good point of that. Hebrew history recognizes it, refers to it.
Do. Peter and Jude both mention it.
Yes. And he actually says on page 77, I don't want to jump ahead too, but
I know.
To the point that you know, the Roman Catholic claimed that these books no longer had any value providing insight into scripture and were declared heretical. Indeed, the same ruling almost succeeded in deleting the books of 1st and 2nd Peter and Jude because of their agreement with the Book of Enoch. And so, you know, some people are quick to say, well, it's not canonized, but they don't understand, you know, we have a couple of books in our Bible that almost didn't make the cut. So
and so so there was a lot of arguments going back and forth, and from some of what I read, you know, basically the Catholic Church didn't believe that it was relevant, but also that people would be able to understand it.
I thought that was the point too. And you have to think about it too. There was of that time, very low literacy rate. Common man didn't typically read the Bible. It was read to them by a priest, and so I guess the language and the history and the you know, kind of collating that information would have been thought too difficult. So I thought that was interesting. Now, do you have a little bit of background about the Book of Enoch? Can you fill us in for those of us that don't know?
Sure. And you can actually get a free copy online. You can download it if you want, or you can print it out. My husband has to print everything out. So we have the whole book printed out. But anyway, so we know Enoch from the Old Testament, from Genesis. He never died. He was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, and he was that one, or he was a man who walked with God. He was
there and not. Yeah.
He was and then he just wasn't there. So I think that was Elijah. But anyway, so apparently when the angels fell, or when they fell, either before or after, you know, once they came down, people saw this happen at that time. So they came down in a very specific place on the earth, which is where we kind of get Greek mythology. And but they talked to him and wanted him, Enoch, to be their mediator between them and God. They were kind of wanting God to take them back at some points, and even to kind of bless what they were doing and that kind of thing. And so Enoch would go and talk to God for them. And it was kind of just a funny story in some parts when you read it, but you know, he's talking to them and they're talking to him as if, you know, they're like almost friends in a sense. But and then we were talking about it off camera, but some of the things, you know, like, okay, you think of these devils and they're all evil, right? But they started all the weapons and all the stuff we think of, but they also taught women how to fix their hair and wear makeup.
Yeah.
So it's like, what was that about? You know. So So they were also teaching men and women things that move them ahead
Mm-hmm.
of a natural progression of learning.
Mm-hmm.
So they were learning things way above their skill level. And so that was a problem. And that was why God had to collect them all and take them off. And where we see them mentioned actually in Peter is when they're put into Tarsus, which that word is wants to, like, I want to say too many T's, but yeah, so they're kind of put there because they also got into a lot of trouble, which we'll see later in the book and later in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
So, but interesting read. Yeah, just very interesting read. So,
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about. Do we want to talk about Satan and his name or his title? I thought that was interesting. Right around page 78.
I was just seeing if there was anything. So I think we covered a lot of this.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So a clear distinction. Are you on? You said 78.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to touch on Hasatan?
Yeah, it's like we're very familiar with calling him Satan or Hasatan. It's a very it's a word that in Hebrew the word means enemy or the accuser. But we've kind of gathered that as his name, but really it's simply a title. And ironically, God really didn't want him to have a name or to be identified.
Right.
And that was part of, you're away from my presence. You're and
you've done this horrible thing.
Yeah. So, and I don't want, and part of it is the pride. So the pride is to make my name known. Right. And that is completely counterfeit of what God desires. And think about that. What I kind of made some notes in there, to make a name. And that, if you think about right around the time of the Tower of Babel.
That's why I was thinking.
And if you think about like tools and weapons came to man right about when iron and bronze became, they understood how to smelt it.
Like Nimrod. Right.
And that's about the 7th generation of man. And the letter that goes with that is Zion. And so, I mean, there's definitely follows some patterns in there, even within the Bible. But the whole premise is man wanted to make a name for himself, which totally follows along with the plan of Satan to make a name of himself. And this is something, I'll just throw this in. Rabbi Foreman, if you ever have a chance, go through some of the videos about the flood and about Noah, but also specifically about the name Shem, because Shem is the name. It's the name in Hebrew.
It means name.
It means name. And if you go through, he does a wonderful job. I'm going to do a terrible job of this, but if you look at the original Hebrew and follow the name Shem, it's the letter combination. Like if you go through and you look at the Bible, you can see the letter combination of Shem, Mem, or Sheen Mem. And the letters actually begin to separate and move away from each other the closer they get to the time of the flood and making a name for ourselves. Wow. So I think it's kind of interesting. How it kind of there are coincidences, but then there's ideas that if you really can dig into it a little bit, I don't know if it's so much of a coincidence or if it's a marker of understanding.
Yeah, and even if we go back, I mean, if we think of the world we live in currently, and what do we have? We have a lot of people who don't know their identity.
So true.
And if we don't think that's a direct correlation from Satan, then we're wrong, because Satan was rejected, which is why he loves for us to feel rejected. And his name was taken from him. His
Mhm.
identity was taken from him. And so what does he want? He wants all of us to feel as bad as he has.
Right.
You have no identity. You don't know who you are. I mean, and even those who don't of us who don't struggle, with a sexual issue there,
Mhm.
but even an identity issue in the sense of, who am I?
Anything. Right.
What is my purpose? Why am I here?
Right.
I mean, those are all things that really we shouldn't question, because we should know, if we are believers in Yeshua, that we're his
Right.
sons, we're his daughters, we are his family, we're part of his people, so we have people.
What power is taken, or wielded over us, if we no longer agree and understand that we are made in the image of God,
Right.
right? And
Right.
so if I can defeat that idea, then
Mhm.
I can replace that thought with
Yeah.
anything. Yeah, anything. So
Yeah.
it's
And we
that.
really have to be careful that we don't fall for those lies, because he wants us to feel worthless,
Yeah.
aimless, feel like we're unimportant and that we're rejected. And I mean, on those, I think that anybody watching this, anybody hearing this,
Mhm.
has felt one of those, if not all of them,
I'm
at some
sure.
point in their life.
Yeah.
But as Lauren mentioned, he writes in its regrettable innocence, the Western Church has erred grievously. He uses these words because he's really upset about this, but by turning a Hebrew description into a name. So, like she said, it meant it was
Yeah.
a title. Satan is not a name; it's a
Right.
title.
Calling him,
So
but think about it too. If we continue to call him the accuser, because that's his title,
it's become accuser. Just become accuser.
well, I think Satan using that title and not understanding what that really means kind of softens it up and waters it down a little bit. But if I had to say, like, every time I referred to him, you're the accuser, that changes
Yeah.
the whole connotation of how you handle that.
And he brings up a really good point, because maybe it's not on this page. Oh no, it is. But Lucifer.
Mm-hmm.
Lucifer is not his name. It never
Either.
was.
Yeah.
It is not Satan's name.
Right.
And it's actually, it's very interesting, because I'm a biologist, and whenever I teach biology and we get to a certain part where we are talking about fish, there's an enzyme in fish that make them glow in the dark. It lights them up, and I'm going to say it the way it looks, because it's pronounced a little differently, but it looks like Lucifer with ASE. ACE, the last three letters ACE mean enzyme. So it's an enzyme that's called Lucifer. And I won't be able to say it correctly, just because I'm trying, and I'll say it wrong.
Luciferase.
Yeah. But there is an actual enzyme that they've named, and that means light.
Yep.
And that is where Lucifer came from. The King James Version that describes him as an angel of light. Now, some have stopped calling him Lucifer. Some versions of the Bible translations, they call him son of dawn, or son of the morning
star, son of the dawn.
Star, yeah. Because he was bright, shining. And if we saw him in his glory, we would think he was the most beautiful thing on this earth, because he was. He was made to be beautiful.
Yeah.
He was made to worship the Lord, and he refused. So his name is not Lucifer. Don't call him that.
His name is not Satan. Yeah.
Is that more likely to call him Satan than Lucifer?
I'm so glad you read that, because I 100% had the same thing underlined.
Yeah, of course you did.
But by turning a Hebrew description into a name, thus giving the honor of a personal name, giving it back to Hasatan. So the same. And the name Lucifer is actually from Babylonia. So it's kind of neat to know the background of that as well.
Yeah. And the thing is, and people disagree, but King James used the Greek manuscripts translated from the Hebrew to write the King James Version. So then there are other manuscripts, other translations of the Bible, that use the direct Hebrew manuscripts.
Right.
So there are names for these manuscripts, and if I looked them up, I could get them for you immediately because I have them written down, but I just can't think of them. But there are manuscripts that are totally in Greek that were translated into Greek from the Hebrew, and that's what most of the King James Bible is written and translated from.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go back into the actual Hebrew, then you see different words and you see different meanings.
Right.
So it's not a bad thing. It's just
it's not a bad thing. And again, you got to consider the worldview at that time.
Right.
You know, the thing. I mean, I say this all the time when I'm speaking with women because words that were translated about women fit the King James time frame. They're great. They're great for the King James time frame, but it's not what the original language was. And as we've studied more now, and we have so many tools now that we can look at original languages.
Right.
It's got a different flavor.
Yes, it does. And there's a lot, even in the New Testament, when you go back to some of the Aramaic words instead of the Greek, you see different meanings. And so we'll
talk about that in a second, because we're going to talk about the 3 different types of angels. And I was surprised to learn what one of the titles of angels meant. And I thought that was interesting. Anything else?
Next page is page 80.
Okay. Yep. Page 80. Yeah. He has stated that he believes there are 3 categories of angels. And the first being the cherubim, and he has also called the archangels. And I'll admit, I camped on this for a little while, and I looked things up, and because I always envisioned archangels and cherubim very differently. And so all of his scripture references, I looked them up and I read them in context, and I had to kind of, where'd you get that from? But I can say that there is no biblical support that directly says cherubim are archangels. So there's nothing in the Bible that links those two. So
but the Bible doesn't use archangel that much either. So
right. And that's all I did. I just looked up each individual word and where it's used in the Bible and looking at the context and stuff. So there's nothing in the Bible that links them, but there's nothing in the Bible either that says, no, they're totally different. They're totally different beings. So
some people have taken like the New Testament descriptions of princes and principalities and made those all levels of demons and angels. And I kind of struggle with that sometimes. So I'm not sure I agree with some of that, but the cherub are what we find on the top of the mercy seat, carved into the mercy seat, the Ark of the Covenant. It's the cherub were the ones who were in the garden, keeping with the flaming swords, keeping Adam and Eve from going back into the garden. They are what are on the veils that separate the holy place and the most holy place. So they're all over the temple. And we showed, when we talked about the temple, remember, we had some of those pictures, like Solomon had these like gigantic.
Which, and this is where I kind of I had to really look things up, because everything we've seen depicted as a cherubim is always the being with the angel wings, the simple being, with the angel wings. And once I looked up all the actions of the cherubim, I see, because it is a warrior, it is a covering, it is a strong, and the archangel is your defender.
Throne room guardians, right? So
yeah. So and they cover. They're the covering angel. They're the guardian angel. So I thought, okay, I can see how archangel and cherubim would go together. This is where he got me, though. He starts saying these are the angels that they have 6 wings.
Yep.
4 faces. 4 faces. The face of a man, the face of a lion, the face of a bull, and the face of an eagle. And so I stopped and I'm like, that's not what's on the Ark of the Covenant. Every time we look at a picture of the Ark of the Covenant, we don't see the 6 wings. We don't see the 4 faces. Every time we see angels on the tapestries. We just think of the one, but these are actually, and if you go to Ezekiel and you read about the living beings that are in the wheels that move around the throne, this is the description that that is given of those angels, how the faces that they have, the 6 wings, the voices, the strength, the assignments, the tasks that that are assigned to them. So he declares that the cherubim are also called the archangels. They are the angels of the highest and most powerful order. They literally surround the throne of God. And then he's got the description. And he says, we are introduced to 4 cherubim. The most commonly one is known as Michael the Archangel, which is the Prince of Israel, the Archangel Gabriel, and the 2 who fell, one, and he calls it Lucifer in quotes. And he makes a disclaimer saying he's going to stick to that name since that's what we all call him. And then one called Abaddon, which is now the angel of death. So
So and one of the things when you were talking about those, we have to go back to the Numbers, and I was trying to find the exact verse, but in Numbers, when the tribes are divided up into groups, they're divided up into 4 groups of 3. So you have all 12 tribes in 4 groups, and each of those groups have a banner that they would put in their camp, and that one of the banners would be the Line of Judah. Then you had the face, the human face, I think was Reuben, and then you have an ox and you have an eagle. So you have those 4 faces, and they all represent something. And I think, and they represent who God is. They represent his power. That, because if we think about it, the Aleph is an ox, right? And then you have Jesus from the line of Judah, Jesus as a human. And then you have on wings of eagles, you have these things mentioned in scriptures for different reason. So if you think of God encompassing all of those are kind of mighty things, I mean, even though lions and eagles could be dangerous, men are still at the top of the hierarchy where animals are concerned. So you see the strength in these faces. So it can also be very kind of metaphorical. But it's interesting that they're not just on the cherub, but they're also the banners of the trial.
Very consistent. I think it's great. He goes through and he also discusses the names that we know all encompass the El, which is God, which is the name of God. And then I thought 2 of the original cherubim, or 1/3 of the original 6, rebelled against God. And so there's different ways to look at when Satan fell, he took 1/3 of the angels. Did he take 1/3 of all of the angels, which
or
probably,
group,
right? Or 1/3 of each group of angels, because they're separated into groups, or 1/3 of the leadership of angels, because they were an original 6. And so I thought that was interesting, the way that was described. It makes sense. I thought that was good. You made a really good point when we were talking about the 7 that surround the throne. You want to talk about that for 1 second?
Oh yeah. Did I
we haven't talked about it here on air.
Oh, I thought I mentioned it here too. So, but okay. So in Revelation, then you have these 7 angels, and so you have the 7 angels that stand before the throne, because we're, like you mentioned, when you think of Gabriel in Luke, because you mentioned you were reading Luke. So you have these angels mentioned, but they are his messengers. They are his angels that do exactly what he wants. So we see some of these, like, and when I spoke of the extra biblical sources, they mentioned Raphael, and Raphael in that source actually says that he is one of the 7 angels that stands in the presence of the Lord. And I thought that was really, really cool, because then you kind of see that language. Then in Revelation, you see it when Gabriel talks to Mary. And or it's either to Mary or Zechariah, right? Because he comes to both of them.
Both. Yeah.
So But
I thought the point that you made too, it kind of, and I know we'll get into this more with this book.
Mhm.
When we look at Revelation, we always see these events that are just hard to imagine.
Yeah.
But if you break it down, like if we know that there are 7 angels at the throne of God to do his bidding and to follow his commands, when the seals are opened, there's 7 seals. When the trumpets are blown,
Right,
there's 7 trumpets.
angels.
And you were saying too, the coals. Yeah. So
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
mean, it definitely makes sense
Mhm.
to understand, to have this understanding of archangels. We don't know if this is only 7 or if it's, you know,
and then we see in Daniel 12, Michael is the protector of Israel. So we see also, then we see this whole thing, the prince, you know, think of the Prince of Persia, and it was a demonic being over Persia that this particular angel, we don't have a name, but they speak to Daniel and explain that they were held up, and Michael came and assisted that situation and helped him fight him off. So even that's interesting, because if this battle between good and evil in the spiritual realm is happening to keep Daniel from getting an answer to his prayer, how much more could that happen to us?
Exactly. Very much so. Well, yeah. I wanted, I mean, I know this isn't what, we're not doing this right now, but
we get on tangents.
I know we're totally going off on our tangents, but this is something that I kind of sat back, because we only ever hear of the one time that Satan confronts tempts Jesus and confronts him.
Oh, right.
But it's actually
he mentions that, doesn't he?
Well, in Luke, because it talks about Luke in Luke. But let me see if I can find it real quick. I'm sorry. Well, I thought it was very interesting. The very last, this is Luke chapter 4, and it said, and when the devil had finished every temptation, he departed from him until an opportune time.
Yeah.
And I thought,
it wasn't one and done.
It wasn't one and done. And he continued to badger Christ.
Yeah. And I think that's what we see happening in the Garden of Gethsemane. We see a battle going on there. And that's why he's asking his disciples to pray with him, because, you know, I mean, and not to try and read something into it, but he was human.
Yeah,
and very much so. Can imagine is he was battling with this. Do I give my life? Do I go through all of this for these thankless
people? Yeah. But also the fear of it, the agony of it, you know,
what's going to happen.
Yeah, because that's a very human side and a very human response.
And just think, if you don't know what's going to happen, you might be afraid because you don't know what's going to happen. But think how much worse if you knew everything that was going to happen to you.
Yeah.
And I mean, thank goodness that God doesn't reveal everything, because we couldn't take it.
We could.
We'd die of a heart attack before we got there if we knew what was going to happen to us in some cases, you know.
Right.
But
I thought that was interesting because
he does.
I think we have one of two responses to Satan. We're either he's everywhere and we're under every rock and everything's his fault, and he could very well be, you know, but we also have a lot to do with what happens.
Yeah.
Or
sowing and reaping going on too.
Or it's too little, like, you know, he can't bother me. I'm a Christian. I can't, you know, I said my prayers today. He's not going to.
Yeah. There's got to be a good balance, because we can't take him for granted, because he likes that.
He does.
But we can't give him credit for everything either, because he likes that.
He does.
So we have to be careful. I mean, I have a family member who likes to go to paranormal events and haunted houses, and we've all warned her that this is not good. You're just putting yourself, you're opening the door.
You are.
And I mean, and you know, I mean, I think that we don't really understand the power he has, because he can come across as a lamp.
Angel of light. Yeah. Looking very good.
We have to be smart, and that's what Jesus told his disciples. Be like wise innocent as a lamb and wise as a serpent or a snake. What did he?
Yeah.
One of those. So he's like, don't be taken advantage of because of your own ignorance, but also know this is what's happening. This is what can happen. So we need to also be just like that. So
exactly.
And he describes him here in Ezekiel 28. So we see two Old Testament scriptures talk about him, meaning Satan, in Ezekiel 28, 13 through 19, but also Isaiah 12. And so we can kind of get an idea of who he was, what he did, because I think in Isaiah, he actually gives like the 5 I will do this statements. So he will rise above God, he's talking about everything he's going to do, which he will do. When we see in Revelation, he'll do just that. But here in Ezekiel 28, we see basically that he was a very beautiful angel that was given beautiful stones. He was an anointed cherub. He was, but God said, you were even blameless in your ways from the day you were created until unrighteousness was found in you. So he was blameless at one point, and then boom, he made the switch. Some say that he was jealous of mankind. When
calls him the anointed cherub that covers. Beautiful. It's a very good.
But he was filled with violence.
Topaz and diamonds and beryl and onyx and gold and everything that was created and prepared.
Yeah. Beautiful, full of wisdom, and we can say full of pride.
Yeah, very much so.
So think of someone who's beautiful and maybe incredibly talented or intelligent, and there's going to be a certain amount of pride there.
Right.
That's just going to go along with it. And that's what we see in abundance in Satan. So
that's it's the accuser, and those are cherubim and archangels. Yeah.
And then of course he says that God stripped both Lucifer and Abaddon, because we see that name in Revelation he comes up from the abyss,
right?
Of their original names and their positions of authority. So, so here this is an interesting note. He said, this development further reinforces our understanding that Hebrew names embody identity. So good point, because think of that. Have you ever thought about like the names that we make up and we don't even know the roots of those names? But the Jewish people knew the roots of all their names. They knew where they came from. They knew what their name meant.
Right.
So the seraphim,
right, number 2
class, and they're the middle order, so they're not quite up there with the cherubim, but they are sometimes known as the burning ones. So what's interesting is the term, the root word sar, S-A-R in Hebrew, means prince. It can also mean burning one, but when you add an extra A, S-A-R-A, you have Sarah, which means princess. So you see the feminine form is princess, the masculine form is prince. And this is what we see in Revelation, especially in chapter 8, like verse 1 or 2, because I just read that. But you have the seraphim take the coals out of the altar, and they're told to throw them to the ground or throw them to the earth. And when we see that happening, we see the fire, the blood, and the hail coming down in the first trumpet judgment. So he says that these angels burn with fire, and like cherubim have 6 wings. So as messengers of God, they race back and forth between heaven and earth doing his will.
Right.
And then he goes into the whole Jacob's ladder, which is very amazing. And I just have to give this a little shout out, because there's so much stuff in that story of Jacob and his ladder. We tell it as a Sunday school story, but Messiah is all throughout that. And when you start reading that and looking up words, the gate, the stone, the ladder, the head, chief, chief cornerstone. All those things, all those kinds of terms come out of that story. It's very cool. So that's just my little pitch. But
Chad Bird does a good teaching on that as well.
Yeah. And I don't know if I got my information. I think some of it was when I was teaching on it. I found a really good website, and just every word, just looking up all these different words within the site in those passages, and the stone is used like what the builders rejected. The stone the builders rejected. It's the same word that's in that when Jacob picks up a stone and puts it around, on behind his head and stuff. So very interesting. But so next are the teraphim. You want to go with that?
Yep, they're the lowest of the angels. The only ones that can take on a human form. So I thought this was interesting. For extended periods, we may have entertained them unaware. That's where we get the idea from.
Hebrews 13.
13:2. I thought this was good. This is on page 83. In addition, teraphim are also denoted by the Hebrew word it's Ayir, Ayin Yud Resh, which means watcher or guard. And this is another spot where I looked up some words. In Daniel 4:10, 17:18, it refers to angels that watch over us and serve as protectors, the custodians of man's soul. It's where we get the idea of a guardian angel. But also when they have fallen, because we're going to talk about fallen angels, they're also called idols. And if you actually go to Daniel 4:10, if you go to Daniel 4:10, and he makes a reference of Genesis 31:34, the word that's used in those verses are idols. But it's the same Hebrew word as
teraphim. The air.
Yeah, the air part. So it says in Genesis 31:34, it says, now Rachel had taken out the household idols and put them in the camel's saddle, and she sat on them. And so he's making kind of the idea that Rachel stole a form, from her father's household, forms of the fallen angels. His suggestion is that these fallen angels of Satan, this is of the lowest form. So the idols that she was carrying and sitting on were in the form of the teraphim, or the fallen angels.
Yeah. So these would look most, terra means earth, means kind of like the ground or earth. So you have that play into, these would be what, would have visited Abraham with Yeshua. That when they talked to an angel, he probably would have been in this form, and that looks most like humans, So I actually did a Bible study, and this man had been a very Baptist man, and across the street was an Assemblies of God church, and the Baptists made fun of the Assemblies, and the Assemblies got, so they had this little feud going on, which I'm not condoning, but this is what happened. And so this man in the Baptist church, who was one of the pastors, was just totally like, these beings don't, this is not all real, I mean, I remember going to a church that was, well, I won't even go into what denomination it is, but basically when I wanted to teach a Bible study on spiritual warfare, they denied it. They did not want that taught. And they were afraid I was going to scare people. And so this man kind of had the same opinion. The spiritual warfare is like nothing we need to really understand, and some of it's all blown out of proportion. Well, one day, because he didn't believe it and he questioned God, but God was leading him to write this incredible Bible study, he sees an angel in his home. The angel, when he was on the first floor, all he saw was up to his hips.
Oh my!
Go upstairs to see the rest of the body. So I think his wife was on the second floor. He was on the first floor, and he sees half the body on one floor, half the body on the other floor.
Wow.
Changed his whole opinion.
Mhm.
Literally split his church in half and everything. And he literally had to go to the other church and apologize
Oh, wow.
for making fun of them and putting them
Interesting.
down, criticizing them. It was a very big lesson the Lord taught him. So,
Mhm.
you know what? Those lessons just but
That's true.
he was shaped like a man. He was a teraphim. He would have looked
Sure.
most like a man. I just happened to think of that. We didn't even talk about it, but
I've looked up if you spell Iyer, it's Ayin Yud Resh, which Ayin is the eye.
right.
Yud is a hand of authority. Resh is the prince or the chief. So the chief authority watcher, really, if you wanted to kind of put that away, or the chief could also represent Yeshua being the prince. So the watcher for the prince, you could even say that. So I think that's interesting. A very good name. And
Right.
I don't think there's any coincidences in how they use that word. But
so he talks about the fallen watchers then.
he does. The
on
fallen
84,
watchers. Yeah.
and their name is similar because it's SAYIR. So
yeah.
So they have a slightly different. They just add an S to the beginning.
Yeah, so I thought this part was so great.
Mhm.
I love it. It's Sayer, like say, and then think about the Greek mythology, the
Right.
satyr. You know, it's
Right.
all very, very super similar. So Greek mythology refers to the satyrs as half man, half beast.
Mhm.
Could that be the reference to Sayer? And then
It wouldn't surprise me.
yeah. And so shin, that word is spelled shin ayin resh.
Mhm.
And so shin always represents destruction and fire. And then ayin is the eye, and then resh is the prince or the head or the chief. So destruction of the watcher for the prince.
Yeah.
So
Very
it's
good.
completely flipped. Yeah, very interesting.
Good. So here he gets into, because we're running out of time here, so
Can
we're
you
gonna wrap
believe
things
it?
up. Yeah, I kind of thought when we got through this, like when I started reading this, I said, we're not gonna get through this whole chapter. So I text her, I'm like, we're not gonna get through this whole chapter, do you think? And she's like, maybe not.
Okay.
So but here's where this chapter is devils and demons, because in his belief, all angels that fell from heaven were all powerful in their own ways.
Right.
So when they fell, they all became devils. So we often think that they were demons. Like Satan's the devil, and then the rest of them were demons. But we'll explain more on that next week. I think that we'll get into that. But all fallen angels are devils, and God will use them in Revelation. He'll use them in times, but this is where Peter talks about what I said earlier. They some of them have been kept in the abyss. They are already there. Satan is about the only one who's allowed to roam freely around the earth, and so we have to get them in a perspective to know that we're not facing all these fallen angels. We're only dealing with one, the head one, the one that caused everybody else to fall.
Right.
So again, we'll keep calling him Satan because that's what everybody knows him by. But he goes on page 85 to Genesis 3:1-19, tells us how Satan took center stage in the familiar story of the fall of man, which occurred sometime after Satan's own downfall. Soon after God created Adam and Eve, Satan looked down upon them with jealousy. And this is something I had learned as well. He was jealous that we were made in God's image.
Right.
So how dare this frail, dull creature be given the authority and dominion that could just as well been his? He wanted the earth. He wanted authority. And we still see that. That's what he wants. So Satan led the assault upon the first man and woman, taking the guise of an earthly creature. He tricked man into trading his covenant relationship with God for the false concept of equality
with God. Right.
So they fell for a sales pitch and lost almost everything.
Yeah.
And the price that man had to pay from that day forward has been beyond comparison.
That's
So there's good stuff in here. And I think that if you're not reading it yet, you need to read this book. And just to open your mind to maybe a different possibility.
Right.
Again, like we opened up and said.
Right.
We're not saying that everything in this book is a gospel. We're just saying that it's a good possibility, something to learn and understand in a different way.
Yeah. It never hurts. I think it definitely will. I know for me, it just changes a little bit the way I approach prayer or the way I approach challenges. It's not that I don't want to give the devil his due, but if it's a consistent battle that we're dealing with, then I need to at least acknowledge the power of God over the situation and the power of Christ, and not belittle it, I guess, because he is. The accuser, I'm going to keep calling him that, is a powerful being, and he has been given power and authority on this earth until another time, until Yeshua returns and reestablishes his kingdom. So,
if you think this conversation was hard, wait till next week. We talk about the Nephilim.
We are.
And so the Nephilim, all different story there, all different, but Chapter 4, we just read up until the Nephilim for this one. You might want to read ahead if you have the book. Read the Nephilim. And please feel free this week. Like we said, this was not live. We can't answer questions. But if you have questions, we will be live.
Please do.
The following week. So please ask us questions.
And we always check our Facebook feed. This show airs on our Facebook pages. And so we always go through and at least make sure we see, because we sometimes will get Facebook user and we don't know who it's specifically from, so we definitely take the time to answer that. So for sure. I think we have Hanukkah beginning tomorrow night at sundown, and so take a look at the different offerings that the Lamb Network might have if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Hanukkah. And
my podcast, my guest talked about Hanukkah. So
did you finally you're able to do that, so that's great. When does that drop? Is it dropped already?
That dropped today, Wednesday, because this is when we're so by Friday it'll be out there, so you can go to graftedjewishroots.com and listen to and she's an author, so she wrote Dreama Archibald Archibald. So I said it wrong, but so she wrote some books and cute books. So for children,
Mouse Malachi.
So
I love them. I have them.
Malachi, I think.
Malachi. Yeah, Mouse Malachi.
Okay.
Mouse Malachi. I have
them and
because I got them for my grandsons. Yeah, they're wonderful.
Yeah, so great books. If you want to explain Hanukkah, and she's coming out with Passover and all that. So we're almost done here, but
we did it.
Thank you. We made it through. Thank you for joining us.
Are you going to do the disclaimer or shall I?
I would do it.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye till next week.
Bye-bye.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugi, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.